Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for attending this very special event in honor of Women's History Month. I know I speak on behalf of the Grand Rapids Student Bar Association when I say that we are truly pleased and grateful to have this panel of very distinguished and accomplished women who have agreed to come here and speak to us today. These women, without a doubt, as you will see as they come up here and speak, are trailblazers. And hopefully us, as young women, since we are literally standing on the foundation that these women built in the legal community, so hopefully by hearing about their triumphs and their struggles, it will better help us understand the triumphs and struggles that we will also face in the legal profession. And that will help us hopefully become trailblazers in our own right in the future. So thank you for the speakers very much for being here. Thank you to everybody for attending. And introducing our first speaker today is Miss Stephanie Shilling.
According to Webster's dictionary, feminism is a set of social theories and political practices that are critical of past and current social relations and primarily motivated and informed by the experience of women. Most generally, it involves a critique of gender inequality. More specifically, it involves promotion of women's rights and interests. According to Pat Robertson, feminism is a socialist, anti-family political movement that encourages women to leave their husbands, kill their children, practice witchcraft, destroy capitalism, and become lesbians. Perspective is important. Our first speaker will add perspective to the role of women in the legal profession by giving us a more local historical perspective. I have the privilege of introducing our first speaker for our event, our very own Ruth Stephens. Ruth Stephens is committed to education, which is evidenced by her master's in information science from Wayne State University, Juris Doctorate from the University of Michigan Law School, that she was the director of paralegal studies at Davenport University, and finally that she has been the reference librarian here at Thomas M. Cooley since 2006. Ruth Stephens is committed to public service, which is evidenced by her presentations to the Legal Assistance Center staff at the Grand Rapids Public Library, representing Cooley on the library subcommittee of the Committee to Commemorate the Abolition of the Transatlantic Slave Trade, not to mention the fact that she has made presentations to the faculty on scholarly publishing. Ruth Stephens is committed to Thomas M. Cooley Law School, which is evidenced by her thoughtfulness in providing cookies to students from library staff at exam time, diligent attention to keeping information up to date for research and writing students, her cheerful presence and interest in helping students, and her willingness to speak at our event today. Please welcome Ruth Stephens.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate having the opportunity to speak today, although I feel like I should rush out and tell my husband and my kids that I'm part of a socialist anti-family movement. and also I do have to confess that I like to bake, and I don't know if that goes with being in this anti-family movement. But I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to be here today. And I'd like to start my remarks by reading to you from an article that was in a legal journal, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it after I read this excerpt. The article is titled, "Increasing Opportunities for Women Lawyers." At the present time, the majority of women who have passed the bar are not in general practice. Many are holding important positions in governmental departments and law offices. The number of practicing women lawyers is growing, and their clientele increases as they demonstrate their ability to do legal work fully as well as their confreres of the other sex. It is a fact that men lawyers of my acquaintance have been the first to encourage and recognize ability in women of their own profession. I believe that ultimately women's position in the legal profession will become assured, and the hesitancy now felt by lay women in general to entrust their legal matters to members of their own sex will be diminished with the general advance of women's cause. In saying this, I do not refer to women's suffrage, but to the general tendency to make room for women in places and vocations of importance where she has shown herself capable of discharging her duties as well as a man or better. And this article appeared in the 1914 edition of Case and Comment, a legal publication, and it was written by Jean Norris, who was one of the pioneer founders of the National Association of Women Lawyers, and who had a very illustrious legal career herself. And to put this in a little bit of historical perspective, at the time that she was writing this, women did not have the right to vote, even though women had been admitted to practice law and had been practicing attorneys in 1914 by almost 50 years, a little bit under 50 years. They still did not have the right to vote. And actually, one of the big developments in Michigan shortly after this was written, that women actually got to sit on juries, because the right to be on a jury was contingent on being a registered voter. So it wasn't until 1918 here that women could be on juries. So a lot has changed since this article was written. In 1920, which was shortly after the article was written, women lawyers comprised 1.4% of the legal profession. And total in the United States, there were 1,738 women lawyers, which is not too many more than probably the number of law students just in Michigan or at Cooley even. Now, according to statistics from the ABA as of a couple years ago, women are very close to 50% of all law students. And in fact, I think they just crossed over to being more than 50% in the last year or two. And as of 2006, women make up 30% of all practicing attorneys. So, huge changes over that period of time. I'm going to talk a little bit about some research that I'm doing on one of the first attorneys in Grand Rapids, Ella Mae Backus, who was born in 1865, the last year of the Civil War, and worked in Grand Rapids as an assistant U.S. attorney starting in 1903. Actually, that's when she first became employed in the United States Attorney's Office, and she worked there right up until her death in 1938. And I became interested in her as a writing project as part of the Historical Society for the Western District of Michigan. And I got more and more interested the more I got into my research to learn more about her. And one of the fascinating things for me was that I came here directly out of law school in 1980 and had never heard of her. And I think many women attorneys, even people who've been here a long time, really had never heard of her. And so I found that here was this woman who was practicing, starting way before I was even born, and I had never heard of her. And what an incredible thing that there were women in that day and age. We're talking about somebody who was older than even my own grandmother, and I didn't even think that women worked outside of the home at that point, unless under extreme financial hardship. And this was someone who had chosen a career as an attorney. So as I looked into Ella Backus, I found out that she'd grown up on a farm and in Gratiot County near Alma, and had a high school education. Then after high school, she went away to what is now Valparaiso to study stenography, which was really the up-and-coming thing then, and a great way for women to get, or anyone actually, because it wasn't restricted to women, to get a job in an office. Because we didn't have tape recorders to take things down, so being able to be a stenographer was really valued. After she finished that, she got a job in a law firm in Traverse City, and I think really got interested in the law, and probably found once she got there that she could do a lot of things that the attorneys were doing. And she ended up studying for the law with the attorneys in the Traverse City firm, and in 1895 was admitted to practice in Traverse City. And I hate to deliver this news to our current law students who are faced with taking the bar, but at that time, not only did you not have to go to law school to be admitted, but basically you just went before a local judge and answered some questions and had an exam, and then if they were satisfied, you could be admitted. So if you could turn back the clock a little bit, you could save a lot of money and a lot of time, I would think. But then there also was a lot of controversy over the qualifications of bar members and within the state bar about whether the requirements should be made a little bit stricter so that that people who were not terribly well prepared were kept out of being attorneys. So Ella Backus worked in that firm until about 1902. Then she worked for a short time at a firm in Reed City and then came down here. And I'm very curious as to why she came down to Grand Rapids to take a job when she had been living up north. And I haven't been able to find out anything to answer that mystery. But she was hired into the U.S. Attorney's Office in Grand Rapids in 1903 as the clerk. So really more of a clerical than an attorney job, but obviously the knowledge as an attorney would be very helpful. And at that time, one of the amusing things I found was that she apparently misrepresented her age when she filled out the papers and kind of shaved off 5 years. But little did anyone know that she would end up working there for 35 years. So I think in that respect, it really didn't matter what age she was because she, outlasted a lot of other people. And really, apart from her being a pioneer in law, and obviously to have the determination and to do this and be somewhere where literally you couldn't look around the room and see other women law students or attorneys. You're it. That in of itself is remarkable. But basically, she ran the whole U.S. Attorney's Office for, after she'd been there for a while, she knew all the ins and outs. And what happened was she had been serving as clerk, and her bosses, who were these U.S. attorneys who came and went as the political parties changed at the national level, they really wanted to get her more money because she was doing everything. And the only way they could do that was by getting her appointed to be an assistant U.S. attorney, which would bump her into a different wage classification. And initially she was reluctant because she thought that she'd lose her accrued pension rights. So there's some correspondence where she's saying, no, I'm not sure I want to be, appointed assistant U.S. attorney, but it did come through. And she served for a long time as both the clerk and the U.S. attorney. And I'm fortunate to have a list of her duties that she wrote up. And when I look at it, I really can't see what anyone else in the office was doing because she was doing all of the administrative work and overseeing the employees and as well as legal work. And so really she became just an institution and a fixture. She was a member of the state bar, which was voluntary at that time, but she's kind of a legendary person that, we don't have too many of those who are just there, the person who knows everything, who makes things run smoothly. So it wasn't just that she was a woman, but it was what she brought to her office. Now, I want to make a little plug for the students and other people just about the fun of this kind of research and some of our historical figures and pioneers. I've gotten to know other people involved in local history research, including Joellen Cleary, who is doing research on the first woman attorney in Grand Rapids, Elizabeth Eaglesfield. But one of the things I found out about is that our public library has cards that were filled out by women during World War I. And the women were coming forward to volunteer their services in the war effort. And they cataloged what their skills are and what they could do for the war effort. So I went up to the history room and had to fill out a request, and they came back with this box of all these different cards. And I'd been warned that they would be out of order, and I thought I might have to look through every single B card to find what I wanted. But I went through, and there was her card, and I was so excited because because of the length of time, it was hard to find information. And one of the things that I found very amusing looking at the card, it has this whole range of skills, and she has on there that she's a lawyer and she can speak well, she can do office work. And then on another section of the card, she checked off these skills: dairying, farming, fruit raising, gardening, poultry raising, and stock raising. Because she was raised on a farm, so she could do all of those things, and she could also, argue a case in court and be an attorney. So it's it was just sort of fun just to imagine that, because certainly those are very far from the skills that I have. I could not claim that at all. So it's just been fun, and I really encourage people who think they might have an interest in this to help, dig out some of these nuggets about pioneers and just sort of help keep this legacy going. There are really some interesting stories to be told. And I think we'll be seeing some publications that Joellen will be writing, but she has uncovered this incredibly fascinating story about Elizabeth Eaglesfield, this other woman attorney who had a very, very colorful life. Okay, let me have this a little out of order here. Okay, and just to go on with just a few more things with the historical context, at this particular time when Ella was admitted, actually sometimes people got admitted to practice, then went to law school. And the University of Michigan Law School started admitting women in 1870, and then the first woman graduated in 1871 and became the first woman admitted to practice in Michigan. That was Sarah Kilgore. And so really, we're looking now then at a 130-year history of women being admitted to practice. It's really pretty remarkable. And one of the somewhat unanswered questions is, why was there sort of a gap after these early women pioneers, and then there was sort of a gap where instead of it slowly increasing, it really wasn't until the late 60s and 70s that you had much larger numbers of women coming into the profession. And I also just checked a few statistics relating to women and the judiciary, and I wanted to share a couple of those with you. The first woman was appointed to United States Circuit Court in 1934, and that was Florence Allen, who had been on the Supreme Court, I think, of Indiana at that point. And it wasn't until 1949 that the first woman was appointed to be a United States District Judge, which I just think is remarkable, how these time lags between the early women lawyers, and certainly women were getting involved at the state level as judges, but before there actually were appointments. And an interesting thing that I read about Florence Allen is that she was absolutely an outstanding attorney and judge, and it's written that she was up for consideration for an appointment to the United States Supreme Court, but it was just unthinkable at that time. I mean, that it was because she was a woman, her name was scratched off the list. So it's just interesting to see how far we've come in that respect. I'd like to just close with something that was written about Ella Mae Backus in the Grand Rapids Herald. After she died, there was a special editorial about her that I was able to find thanks to records that the United States Attorney's Office kept. And to me, this is pretty remarkable because today we don't see editorials very often celebrating the contributions of people who've died. So the fact that this was written about a woman, it was written in October of 1938, that the editors of the paper, wanted to really celebrate her life and what she had contributed. And I'll just read one paragraph from it. The title of it is "A Woman Who Made Good." Not so many women make good in public office. The odds are against them from the start. Not so many women make good as lawyers, although there are outstanding examples. The odds are against them in general practice. One woman, a lawyer and a public official, made good in a manner that should prove an inspiration to women aspiring to the legal profession and to public service. That woman was Ella Backus, for 35 years, Deputy United States District Attorney for the Western District of Michigan. Ms. Backus died sometime during the night of last Tuesday. And this goes on with more of a tribute. And I think this is just remarkable, and I'd like to just end with the observation that Ella Mae Backus certainly didn't know that she would be considered an inspiration to anybody, or that someone would be talking about her at a luncheon in a whole different century. But for all of us, we never know when we're that inspiration for somebody else, or you're a trailblazer. And I think a lot of people have that role in different ways, to greater or lesser extents. And I think everybody has the capability for that. And I think you'll be hearing from women who have been inspirations to other people locally, and it's something we could all really aspire to. So thank you very much.
Our next speaker today earned her law degree from Wayne State University. From there, she practiced in a broad range of civil and criminal litigation in both the state and federal courts. She practiced as associate attorney at Hall, Andry, and Balicki, hopefully I'm not butchering that, in Detroit. And she was also a trial attorney for the Detroit Public Schools. She currently is the assistant U.S. attorney for the Western District of Michigan. And it is my privilege to present to you Ms. Francesca Ferguson.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank all of you for having me here today. I wasn't expecting this big a group. I'm used to showing up for things for student bar and women bar and seeing 10 or 12 people. And so this was a very nice surprise. I'm very happy to see some young men here too. I think, as we move forward with all the issues in our society, we all need to be in the room, and that's the only way that we're going to see any change. I've been telling people all day, I've been kicking around, what am I supposed to say here? And that's because I have so many things I'd like to talk to you about, and I have 10 to 15 minutes. So if it seems a little scattered and I'm jumping around, it's because I want to hit a lot of these issues if I can. I will start by saying to you that I don't come from a family of lawyers. There were no lawyers in my family. I knew no lawyers. I'm of an age, though, where we saw civil rights things on TV. There was a lot going on in our country back in the 50s and 60s, and I gained just a lot of respect for people who will stand up and do the right thing, and I think all of us are raised that way. I mean, that's not foreign to us. We're raised that way at home. You do what's right. You know what's right and what's wrong. Do what's right. That's the easy thing. Well, you got to see on TV that wasn't always the easy thing, that even when you do the right thing, sometimes there are bad consequences, but you have to do it anyway. And at any rate, I just developed a huge respect for the legal profession and always wanted to do that, not really knowing what it was. For me, it was about ideals. It was about books. I ended up being a litigator. I knew nothing about that. I was a little shy kid. I didn't talk. I had to learn to talk to do this, because it is about books and it is about ideas, but it's also about having to stand up and communicate those ideas to other people, to influence people to see the issue your way. And, so it develops a lot of skills if litigation is what you want to do. Coming from the limited background and limited knowledge of the law, litigation was all that I found out about the law. As time goes on, I meet other lawyers. I find there are all kinds of things that lawyers can do that don't have to do with litigation. However, at this point, I happen to love that, so I stumbled on the right thing. Looking at TV now has given me some different lessons. Right now, we're looking at an election that's pretty amazing. Even if you have no particular candidate in this election, this is not a political comment on my part. What I'm saying to you is it's just so evident that some things have changed in our society. Not everything, okay? I'm not saying that we're there yet, because I think news in the last week pretty much shows me we're not there yet, but we're moving in the right direction. And this caused me to think back to 1979 when I was admitted to the bar. I worked for a very small little law firm that happened to do a lot of work for the city of Detroit, did a lot of work for the UAW, did a lot of work for the Detroit Board of Education, and so I was in court a lot. And what I saw there was that there were very few women and even fewer black people. Okay? It was amazing to me, because by that time I had met black lawyers in Detroit. They didn't do civil litigation. They were over in the criminal court, and it was amazing to me to meet young women, black and white, who were starting to practice in the circuit courts doing civil litigation, and how we would be asked questions by older attorneys, primarily older black male attorneys, about what do you do over there? How does that work? What happened at mediation? And that's changed. We're seeing a much more diverse workforce, basically. Not as much in Grand Rapids, okay? I'm from Detroit, so when I'm talking about these years, that's really about Detroit. When I came here in 79, in 89, 10 years later, I had that same kind of experience. It was like I was starting again, where there were so few African Americans or women who were practicing law. And the number of women has increased a great deal here. The number of African Americans hasn't, and that's for a lot of reasons. And many have come here and moved to other places where there are larger black populations and where they chose to live. There was more of a comfort to them on a day-to-day basis. But I still have to say that there's progress here and that we need to keep knocking down the obstacles to women and blacks practicing here. I've been at the U.S. Attorney's Office for a lot of years now, and I've run out of all the substantive things they make you go. We go to South Carolina to a training place, and I've done all of those. So I've started taking these other kind of management things and personality things, and because that's all that's left. And they've been so helpful because they remind me of things like motivation is internal. You know what you want to do in your life, and only you will get you there. So when there's an obstacle, you go over it or around it or under it, but you keep moving. We jokingly say in those classes that demotivation is what managers do. So, you have to keep that in mind and know that that's their purpose, but you don't let them stop you, okay? I do have to add, though, that there have been some exhilarating things about my almost 30 years of practice. I've had clients in private practice where I know that I've done wonderful things for them. I've worked with the Women's Justice Center in Detroit, where we did a lot of work with battered women, and that was an eye-opener for me. When you go to the hospital and you see somebody who's been beaten half to death and has tubes and all kinds of things, and they need help, and they have no money. That probably could have gone unsaid, but that's what generally happened. And, you can really see a difference when you help someone like that. And, remember that by gaining all these skills, you're going to do things for your family, you're going to do things for yourselves, but there's so much to do in the community, too, and you have the skills to do that. I still love books, I still love ideas, and so one of my favorite cases ever was before Judge McKeague was a judge. He was my opposing counsel. And it's all about how land becomes land in the United States of America. Who knew, We were fighting about whether someone owned a piece of land, and the United States said they had never surveyed that piece of land, so it wasn't land. Okay, it isn't land until the U.S. government says it's land. And, I can appreciate that. We lost, but that was the law. They chose wisely not to appeal it. But just reading those old cases and reading the theory was so interesting. And they're just areas that I never would have thought of. How does land become land? And most cultures, we know that we didn't make the land. But we also are able to own land and use it for leverage, for borrowing, which many countries that don't have our system can't do. So, we have our quirks here, and they're working well for most of us, but it's very, very interesting to get back into some of those old cases from 100, 150 years ago when they're selling land to the railroads and whether it's land or not land. And it makes up for those cases where you're bitter and bickering all day and fighting about things that really aren't very important in the big picture. I will tell you, I do have some frustrations, though, from these years. And when I first started practicing in Detroit, I can remember waddling over to federal court and being so excited, and the judge refused to believe I was a lawyer. wouldn't let me into the conference. It's like I had to pull out my bar card and show it to him. After which he apologized profusely, but it's like, why on earth would I show up in court and say I'm a lawyer if I'm not? I mean, why would you do that? I just couldn't imagine. But, they were so used to seeing men walk in there that I guess it just wouldn't fit into any of his belief systems that I could possibly be there with a bar card. And this was in like 1980. There had to have been other women practicing law in Detroit. I know that there were, but apparently not in his courtroom. I don't know. And there are bosses. There are. You have issues. And Ruth Stephens touched basically on these family issues and people maybe needing some more time to do other things. And it's very hard for some bosses to give any leeway. One of the good things about the federal government is there are a lot of programs in place for flex time and other kinds of accommodations. It doesn't mean that your boss will like them, okay? Not all bosses believe in all of those policies, but fortunately in some very large organizations the policies are there anyway. But as I said earlier about doing the right thing, sometimes there are bad consequences, Sometimes it costs you to live your life according to your values, and only you can decide whether you're going to do that or if you're going to be influenced to live them by your boss's values. And I would hope and encourage you to live by your own. And with that, I'll say good afternoon.
Everybody having a good time? Good. Francesca Ferguson talked about motivation and how it's an internal drive. And I think our next speaker, it's very evident that she had this motivation through her entire legal career because it's so adventurous. She comes to talk to us about where have all the female law graduates gone. After graduating from the University of Iowa College of Law in 1996, she's litigated both in federal and state courts on a variety of employment matters, discrimination, harassment, retaliation, whistleblower acts. She's also was involved in a highly publicized school board hearing involving a school principal accused of misconduct. She's one of the few attorneys in Michigan to have participated in hearings before the Michigan Department of Civil Rights and conducted oral arguments before the Michigan Civil Rights Commission. So without stealing any more of her thunder, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Miss Jennifer Jordyn.
I was keeping a low profile in the back row, and it's a long walk up here. Well, thanks for that nice introduction. You should take a good look at me because I'm an endangered species. I am an equity partner in a private, large law firm, and we are an endangered species. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my perspectives in that regard. One thing I am not, though, is a trailblazer. I feel uncomfortable with that label coming after Fran Ferguson, who's not only a trailblazer but does it with a fantastic manicure. Preceding Judge Neff, another trailblazer, with my mentors here in the room, Dale Iverson and Lynn Perry and Ann Sturzma. These women were the trailblazers. All I'm doing is sort of like making my way through the sort of weed-covered, overgrown path that they blazed first. But my topic has to do with where have all the female law students gone? Women have been graduating from law school in numbers of when I graduated in '96, they were graduating, I thought, at levels of about 50%, and that's been going on for some time. So, given those numbers, given the numbers of women who've been graduating from law school, and for as long as they've been graduating from law school, female partners in law firms should be about 40%. And I'm going to talk about law firms. I'm really talking about law firms from my perspective of 10 to 15 or more. When I refer to private practice, that's really what I'm talking about. Obviously, anyone who's got their own office, their own shingle, whatever it may be, that person is in private practice. But I'm talking about the dynamics of many lawyers together trying to make an enterprise work. 40% of partners in law firms should be women. The number is actually lower than 17%. Median income for females, $62,000 a year versus $160,000 for men. Why is this? Obviously, lots of people smarter than I am have written about this and thought about it. And if I knew what the answer was, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation because I would fix it. But I'll tell you, obviously some of the reasons that are out there are the pressures of family and work-life balance. These things are hard, and the difficulty seems to fall disproportionately on women. Although I would say fairly in my generation, I think a lot more male attorneys are struggling with work-life balance as well. Because of societal expectations, sometimes those pressures fall more heavily on women. Obviously, in some ways, I think society gives women a little more freedom as well, freedom of a sort, a kind of freedom. If I decide that I want to step away from the practice of law and do something else, either raise my kids or garden or start an internet business, my in-laws aren't going to look askance at me like, what is she going to, they look askance at me, but they're not going to look askance at me in terms of what is she contributing to the family. I think for a lot of men, the pressures for them to stay in the practice of law, societal pressures, expectations, maybe keep them where a woman might step away. I don't know that that's a good or a bad thing, but it's something that I observe. One woman's thought, I think this is kind of funny. I read this blog called Jezebel. It's like a feminist blog, but they also talk about stupid celebrity stuff too. But this was just on Lindsay Lohan's leggings or whatever. But this was a post from just yesterday about why don't women have more power in corporate America. And you've probably heard this. The number of female board officers at Fortune 500 companies has been steadily falling over the past few years, as has the number of women lawyers. Women don't run things in corporate America because corporate America holds up high everything we hate about dudes, obsessed with short-term thrills, driven by them, too often wholly lacking in any sort of long-term exit strategy, competitive to the point of lunacy, arrogant to the point of self-immolation. Women don't run corporate America because corporate America sucks. That's one woman's opinion. Anyway, not necessarily mine. I get this thing all the time. You get stuff that your friends forward you via email. This is supposedly Maya Angelou's best poem ever. Have you gotten this? You know what I'm talking about? About every woman should have something perfect to wear if the employer or date of her dreams wants to see her in an hour. Are you familiar with this? Every woman should have a set of screwdrivers, a cordless drill, and a black lace bra. Hopefully not all at the same time. Every woman should have a friend who always makes her laugh and one who lets her cry. It goes on in that vein. And actually, I learned something very interesting when I was Googling the title of this poem. It's actually not a poem by Maya Angelou. It was written by some woman named Pamela Redmond Citran for Glamour magazine. So, first of all, when you get this, respond. It's not really a poem by Maya Angelou. And that actually makes me really happy because I like Maya Angelou, and I think this poem's sort of schlocky. But in any event, in the vein of what every woman should have, I've written you all a poem. And it's called What Every Woman Who Wants to Succeed and Maintain in Private Practice Should Know. Succeed and maintain, kind of two different things. And frankly, I think this applies in large part to men as well. It applies to attorneys going into really any kind of practice. But these are things that have worked for me, that have helped me be where I am today and having the privilege of speaking to all of you. First and foremost, you've got to have a passion for what you do. You've got to have a passion for practicing law because it is hard sometimes and it sucks sometimes and it's going to take you away from places you want to be and people you want to be with And when you are with those people, it can make you really unpleasant to be around. Mike's like, oh yeah. It's not at all like law school. I will tell you, the people I went to law school with who loved law school, they just thought it was great. None of those people are practicing anymore. It's very different. If you're going into it for the money, that's the wrong reason to go into it, because, as I've just told you, lawyers don't necessarily make a whole lot of money. Sometimes, but not always. And it isn't the way it's getting portrayed on television either. It's a lot of drudgery. I've always said, the real Ally McBeal would be sitting in a conference room with a big box of documents, I may be dating myself with the Ally McBeal reference, but in any event. So you need to have a passion for what you do. And frankly, I, like Fran, had no lawyers in my family. I ended up getting into the law through the avenue of having an English degree that I couldn't do anything with, and then becoming a legal secretary and, looking at the attorneys that I was working for and realizing I could do that and make a little more money. And it just happened to be something that most of the time I love. And I really like litigation. I like writing. I like public speaking. I like argument. I like winning. So that's all worked out for me. But really, those of you, I know Cooley, you're going to get as good a sense at Cooley as anywhere of what the practice of law is like, because I know there's such an emphasis on professors who've actually been out in private practice. I had a number of professors at my law school who hadn't spent any time in private practice, and I think that's a real benefit for you. But take advantage of the clinic here, take advantage of internship opportunities, clerkship programs outside of the law school environment, because you don't want this job unless you really want this job, right? Second most important thing is the cultivation of mentors. And when you go into a law firm, probably the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to get a mentor assigned to you. That's going to be a useless relationship. That person, I tell you, you want to identify mentors who are successful people. And you can define success in a number of different ways. These may be people who worked out the life balance thing. And if you find those people, tell me who they are, because I want to meet them. But these are people, they may be people who just are really good at developing business. They may be people who are very good at practicing law. And surprisingly, people who are really good at developing business and people who are really good at practicing law, not always a lot of overlap there. But so you're going to want to have a lot of different mentors in a lot of different areas. But by definition, successful people are too busy for you. So what you need to do is get them invested in you. You have to work at that relationship. Nobody that is worth their salt as a mentor is probably going to show up in your little associate office door one day and say, hey, let's go to lunch and let me tell you about how to be successful here. That will not happen. And that will not happen if you're a man either, unless there are particular circumstances involved. Like this is, there was a New York Times article about this a while ago. I mean, nobody's getting mentored in large law firms, men or women. So you need to cultivate those relationships. And there will come a point when this person has been in your court, when they have cheerled for you, when they have smoothed the path for you, they will get invested in you. They will take some ownership over you. And that relationship will develop over time. But you, in the start, as the new young green associate, need to take ownership of developing those mentor relationships. And I have lots of different mentors for lots of different things. I have mentors who are my age. My buddy Elizabeth is here. She's my work-life balance mentor all the time. We talk about this stuff all the time. I have a mentor for office politics, the guy who always sort of knows how to get things done and not ruffle a lot of feathers. You want to have a lot of different mentors and a lot of different things, because not all lawyers are good at all things. Having a supportive family obviously is key. My husband started out in private practice. Now he's a professor here. Without the flexibility that he has as a law professor, I'm not entirely sure that I could do what I do now. We have 2 young children under 5, so having family support, whatever your family situation is, whether you have kids or don't, is crucial. It helps to have somebody who understands the demands of private practice, why you sometimes are spending long hours at the office, why you have to travel or do these things. That just helps. And beyond that, just having a terrific support network. And one of the best ways I found starting to practice in Grand Rapids, and I realize that a lot of you may go all over the country, but in Grand Rapids, we have a great women's bar. I see a lot of familiar, friendly, beloved faces here today. Those are friendships that I met either through the Grand Rapids Bar Association or through my involvement in the Women Lawyers Association here. And, you know, there is nothing like just sitting down with other practitioners who have the same struggles that you do and finding out that you're not alone and that you are beating your heads against the same wall or the same glass ceiling as it may be. And if you do have kids, having a great daycare is critical. And really, all those people, and I'll say this, you know, in terms of your support network, here's another thing, and this is just a practical tip. Women going into private practice in law firms, you have got to work it out with the support staff. And I'm telling you, you are going to, this is one area where I think young women have slightly different challenges than male attorneys, because 99.9% of the support staff, and I think any law firm, is female, and they are going to be older than you are and more experienced than you are, and they're going to know a lot more than you do, and many of them don't take kindly to any young whippersnapper, male or female, coming in and telling them how it's going to be. And everybody's got to kind of find their own way in terms of what your style is, what your personality is. I will say I've been fortunate because we have fantastic secretaries in my section, and they're wonderful, and I do have the benefit of having been a legal secretary, so I know exactly what I do that drives them crazy, and we can all laugh about it, I hope. But treat those people well, because they can save you and will save you. They will pull your ass out of the fire if you earn their respect and their loyalty. So do that. Don't be that woman attorney because they all talk to each other. Don't be that woman, because they can also make your life a living hell. And the same is true with if you have children and you have daycare or, you know, nannies or whatever. Treat those people well, because you know, they also can make your life a lot easier or less easy. You know, some of these have a sense of humor, have a sense of priorities. When you start practicing, you will start billing at rates that will shock you. And I remember talking to a more senior female partner and saying, boy, my time, it cannot possibly be worth this. And she's like, yeah, I know you say that now, but you're going to have hours down the road that you're going to feel like no amount of money is worth that hour that I just spent. And that's absolutely true. Keep that in mind. And also, you know, last night I was thinking about that and in preparing for this speech, and you know, my 16-month-old son was doing a little dance for me in his diaper, and I thought, you know what, no amount of money is worth that either. So having a good sense of what your priorities are and where to draw the lines in the sand, both with respect to your profession and with respect to the outside demands on your life. And, you know, if it were easy, obviously I wouldn't need to be up here talking to you about it, but know what those things are. Picking your battles. I have fought and lost a lot of pointless battles about stuff that I wish I hadn't spent energy on professionally and otherwise. Just save your energy. Try to figure out, you know, and save your energy for the things that really count. And then give folks the benefit of the doubt and don't hold grudges. That's something that's taken to me a long time to learn, because I'm a huge grudge holder. I'm still mad at a girl from the 4th grade who pushed me off the swing, but you know, there's no place for that in professional life, really. And people, both opposing counsel and people on your own team, and frankly, sometimes more often, it's the people on your own team who are really going to kick you when you're down. And you know what? That happens. You can't take it personally. You just got to move on. If you're here for the clients and for the practice of law, then that's what it's about. And you're here for your family. That's what it's about. And you know, that kind of stuff, just let it go. And I come home all the time and I do just letting it go. Anyway, I'll just conclude in as a mom with young kids and aging parents. And just being the sort of person I am, there's a lot of things that, you know, professional women's guides, and there's a lot of books out there now about how to succeed as a female professional, and They tell you not to do certain things, and I'll tell you, I've done them, all of them, and I'm still here to tell the tale. So I've cried in front of every partner whose opinion matters to me. I can tell you that right now. And, they still, I think, respect me. I mean, they go, nah, with the waterworks again, please. But that, you can get through that. I've had to cancel stuff because of sick kids. I've had to cancel stuff because I had parents with illnesses. And, frankly, working in Grand Rapids, one of the first things Dale told me is, as a mom, it's a good place to practice because you will get opposing counsel who are cool about that kind of thing. But you can do that, and it doesn't necessarily reflect that you're not committed to what you're doing and that you're not going forward. And, I've like I said, I've picked some really stupid battles that I've spent a lot of my time, like, the all-boy poker night thing and, all these kinds of things. There's a lot of this internal networking mentoring that is hard for women to break into, and frankly, I think it's always going to be hard for women to break into. Getting a male partner to take a young female associate to lunch is just hard because what conclusions might people draw from that? And it's unfortunate, but I have great male mentors, and I have just worked really hard to cultivate those relationships to the point where they have no choice but to take me to lunch sometimes. And, I'm actually not that bad of a lunch guest. So that's my poem. So I hope you've all enjoyed it. It's been a real privilege and a pleasure to talk to you. And I say this, I've taught at the Hillman Trial Advocacy program for a few years now, and I say this to the female students that come through that as well. There aren't a lot of us out there, like I said. We're sort of an endangered species, so I'm always happy to talk to anybody who has questions about it. How do I make this work for me? I'd be pleased to, and you can, reach me through either Tracy or my husband. He usually knows where to find me. So thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Jordyn, for that very useful advice. I know I was taking mental and physical notes while she was speaking. I appreciate that very much. Thank you. Earlier, Ms. Ruth Stephens talked about inspiration. And certainly our next speaker today has been, is, and will continue to be an inspiration to the very people sitting in this room for a very long time. And this isn't exactly when it all started, but she did graduate from Wayne State University in 1970. Shortly after that, she worked as an IRS, estate, and gift tax examiner. After that, following that, she was a law clerk for the Court of Appeals. After that, she was the assistant city attorney for the city of Grand Rapids, and it's important to note that she was the first woman hired to be such. Following that particular experience, she was first an associate at Vanderveen, Freihofer, and Cook, and then later made partner at that firm, which is a local Grand Rapids firm. She was the first woman to be associate at that firm and the first woman to make partner at that firm. Not too long after that, she was a Michigan Supreme Court commissioner, again the first woman to hold that particular position. Following that, she was assistant U.S. attorney for the Department of Justice, then went into private practice with William G. Raymond, I hope I'm saying that right, PC, in private practice, specializing in personal injury matters. Then she spent nearly 20 years on the Michigan Court of Appeals, and of course most recently had a very monumental appointment to the United States District Court of the Western Michigan District, the first woman to have an Article III federal judge appointment for the Western District of Michigan. Truly monumental. And also, which is very interesting, in 1971 she was the first woman to play in Lansing's all-men's softball league. Yeah. And from what I understand, she's not too shabby of a softball player to this day, which is fantastic. And beyond just her legal experience, She serves on numerous boards of directors for the Easter Seal Society, Women's Resource Center, Junior Achievement, United Way of Kent County. She serves on the Board of Trustees for the Winchester Scholarship Fund. She's on the Board of Commissioners, for the State Bar of Michigan. She has served numerous officerships on the Grand Rapids Bar Association, including treasurer, vice president, president, serves on so many prestigious committees that they're too numerous to actually list today. But it is interesting to note that she is the chair for the State Bar of Michigan Character and Fitness Subcommittee. Law students, shake her hand before you leave. Also, the honorary co-chair for Habitat for Humanity Project, Women Building the Dream. She's a member of the State Bar of Michigan Open Justice Commission, and very recently, amongst her many accolades, was the recipient of the 2006 Outstanding Member Award from the Women Lawyers Association of Michigan for the Western District. And all of this is literally just barely scratching the surface, because we could probably talk for the rest of the afternoon about her accomplishments, achievements, and accolades. But despite all that, I know that we all are very anxious to hear what she has to say. And we are very honored to have her here today giving her talk entitled, "How Did This Happen? Women on the Bench in the 21st Century." Please welcome the Honorable Janet T. Neff.
Thank you, Tracy, for that introduction. And thank all of you for the invitation to participate in this program, which really addresses a subject that is near and dear to my heart. Every woman lawyer of my advanced age has statistics and stories about being a woman in a man's profession. Just briefly, when I graduated from law school in 1970, in a class of about 200, there were 6 women. When I was interviewing for jobs in my 3rd year of law school, the interviewers, all of whom were men, of course, didn't hesitate to ask if I was married, if I planned to have children, if I had difficult menstrual periods, which might disable me from working for 2 or more days a month. And in one case, one of the interviewers shook his finger in my face and challenged me to name one. I challenge you. You name one good woman trial lawyer in the city of Detroit. And of course, I was interviewing for a job as a trial lawyer at an insurance defense firm. And there was not a single woman judge on the bench in Kent County until Carol Irons was elected in 1986 to the 61st District Court bench. Now, I think it's true that the days of such overt gender bias are thankfully behind us, but that does not mean that there is no longer gender bias that affects our profession any more than we can say that it is gone from our society in general. As one of our speakers mentions, numerous task forces and studies have been conducted around the issue of gender bias in the legal profession. There are both direct and subtle forms of disparate treatment of women lawyers, as well as of women judges, women litigators, women witnesses, and all of these have been well documented. It's true that barriers have come down. As I think it was Ruth Stephens mentioned, women make now about 48%, maybe it is over 50% now, of law students. And our presence in law schools has steadily risen over the years, certainly since I was a law student in the late 1960s. But women are still underrepresented on law school faculties, in law school administrative positions. They are underrepresented in positions as corporate legal counsel. As Jennifer Jordyn indicated, women are paid less than men lawyers for comparable work. Where have we heard that line before? Women lawyers are underrepresented as partners in law firms, in government legal jobs, and most pertinent to what I have to say today, women are underrepresented in the judiciary. Everybody in this room, I'm pretty sure, is aware that only 2 women justices have been ever appointed to the United States Supreme Court, the first being Justice Sandra Day O'Connor in 1981. When Justice O'Connor was appointed to the Supreme Court, there were 700 active federal judges, Article III judges. Only 48 were women. In preparing for these remarks today, some other statistics came to my attention about appointments to the federal bench by presidents going back to Franklin Roosevelt. From Roosevelt to Ford, 1933 to 1976, there were 1,054 presidential appointments to the federal bench. 8 were women, less than 1%. Since 1977, the numbers have improved. 16% of Jimmy Carter's appointments to the federal bench were women. We hit a little bump with Ronald Reagan, went down to 8%. 19% of George H.W. Bush's were women, 29% of Bill Clinton's, and through June of 2005, 21% of George W. Bush's appointments have been women. The question that we have to ask as lawyers is what explains these cold, hard facts? And they are facts that we can't escape. An answer, and I certainly think it's not the only answer, but an answer that resonates is a variation on the theme of the good old boys club, although it's, in my view, a little more sophisticated than that. Judicial appointments at both the state and federal levels of government are influenced and directed at both formal and informal levels. The formal level is the one that is most open to public view. The applications or expressions of interest in judicial openings by lawyers. The vetting of qualifications by bar associations or committees that are appointed for that specific purpose. The investigations into personal and professional background by government agencies when you are nominated. Senate judiciary hearings at the federal level, and so on. These are the parts of the process that are more or less transparent and that the public sees or is aware of if they're interested. But the informal level is the one that is often not open to public view, and it consists of numerous networks among people and groups who are influential with the appointing authority, either the president or the governor. And it's here that women candidates for judicial appointments often fall short through no fault of their own because the networks and influence built up by these so-called power players much more often involve men and the men they mentor than they involve women and the women they mentor. And I don't mean to suggest for a moment that men never mentor women or that women never mentor men. I have had, as Jennifer has, and I think probably Fran and Ruth as well, I've had many wonderful male mentors. In fact, when I first started in practice, there were so few women around, you couldn't find a woman mentor if you looked for one day and night. And I have mentored other women, and I've mentored on occasion young men, lawyers as well. I have to admit my own bias. I do try my best to mentor women, lawyers, because that's where I think the need is the greatest. And by and large, the reality is that men are far more likely to mentor other young men. And here I think a little historical perspective is helpful, and it illustrates to some extent the old saying that the more things change, the more they stay the same. Ruth mentioned a woman named Florence Ellenwood Allen. She was a woman who was born in 1884 in Utah and graduated from NYU Law School in 1913. And because no law firm would hire her, she started her own practice in Cleveland, Ohio, where she was very active in the women's suffrage movement. In her law practice, she was a litigator. She represented women's organizations largely, fighting for advances in women's status through changes in the law. No doubt she was viewed as an agitator, and I don't have any doubt that she was an agitator, and it really got her a long way. She campaigned hard for women's right to vote and gave speeches apparently all over the state of Ohio, and she became very active in the Ohio Democratic Party. And this is where we see the first manifestation of the power of networks to produce results for women as they have produced results for men over time. Florence Allen's hard work in the suffrage movement and in the Democratic Party led to an appointment as an assistant prosecutor in Cuyahoga County, Ohio in 1919. When the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920, giving women the right to vote, she didn't waste any time at all. She ran for a spot on the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas. And with the mobilized help of women from both political parties with whom she had worked, in addition to support from newspapers, labor unions, churches, and other groups, she was elected in 1920. She was the first woman in the United States of America to be elected to sit on a court of general jurisdiction. And she wasn't done. Not by a long shot. In 1922, she again mobilized her coalitions, her bases of support, and this time across the whole state of Ohio, Ruth, not Indiana. She was elected to the Supreme Court of Ohio as an independent. She was the first woman elected to a court of last resort in the United States. But that wasn't the end either. In 1934, as Ruth mentioned, President Franklin Roosevelt nominated, and the United States Senate confirmed, Allen the first woman appointed to any federal appellate court. She served on the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals until 1959. Her appointment to the federal judiciary, and this became particularly pertinent to my own experience, but her appointment to the federal judiciary was aided significantly and perhaps was even owing to the lobbying efforts of a network of women reformers who had earned positions in the New Deal government of Franklin Roosevelt, led by a woman named Molly Dewson, of whom I'd never heard before, but she was apparently a Democratic National Committee woman at that time, and many supportive male colleagues as well. If you read a little bit about Ms. Allen, it's clear that there was a good deal of controversy over her appointment to the Sixth Circuit. And there were some difficulties when she took the bench in Cincinnati. But as you might guess, she prevailed over all of them, and in 1958, she became the chief judge of the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. And it's true that her supporters tried on numerous occasions during 3 presidential administrations to elevate her to the United States Supreme Court, but all of those efforts failed. And in fact, apparently she came closest with Harry Truman, but Fred Vinson, who was then the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, apparently discouraged President Truman from nominating a woman. But interestingly, and sadly, it wasn't until 1968, 34 years after her appointment, that the second woman was appointed to any federal appeals court in the United States. As a little interesting footnote to Florence Allen's story, I'll note to you that there are 130 Article III district and circuit judges in the Sixth Circuit, which covers the states of Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee. 24 of the 130 are women. 10 of them, almost half, are from the state of Ohio, which I think shows that she blazed a trail for women in the judiciary that endures today in the state of Ohio. So I guess we come back to the question of what can we learn, what have we learned, what should we learn from the experience that Florence Allen had. And it's summed up in a quotation from a former member of Bush 41, George H.W. Bush's administration, who was involved in the judicial appointment process in that administration. He was speaking at a panel discussion about political networking and judicial appointments. And this is a direct quotation. My experience working on federal judicial appointments during the last administration, the first President Bush, and this really surprised me with respect to gender, was that still in this day and age, there was often a conflict between a male candidate, generally a white male candidate, who, although sometimes quite well qualified, the emphasis here is mine, you should know, who although sometimes quite well qualified, sometimes not in conventional terms, had much stronger political and sort of patronage political connections. You know, he had been a party chair, state party chair, or contributed in a significant way to the political decision maker at the state level, versus a woman with spectacular educational and experiential qualifications. So that was often a real tension in a particular choice. And invariably, his word, invariably, the patronage politics would win out over straight qualification. So I guess it led to my conclusion that absent the sort of political force of identity politics, that is, first woman, wanting to put the first woman in a district or circuit that had never had one, or wanting to just have one more woman or one more African American on the bench, that women would be even further behind in terms of their representation on the federal bench, even in this day and age. Close quotes. So I think we can conclude that a major roadblock to women reaching the bench via appointment is the fact that most of the power players who influence and determine who gets appointed are the entrenched male establishment. It also means that women have to recognize how the system works and focus on developing their own networks with political clout, like Florence Allen did. That women must seek to be mentors, and they must be mentors. And that it is often the case that women are more likely than men to come from places like state courts, as I did. So they need to seek out these positions as well, often by election, because the appointment process passes them over at the state level too. I was passed twice for appointment to the Court of Appeals before I ran for and was elected to that court in 1988. And I don't mean to suggest either that the men who were appointed instead of me in those two instances weren't qualified. But it is true that at the time they were appointed instead of me, there was a vast underrepresentation at the appellate court level in Michigan of women. It is still, in my opinion, as a woman who has been a lawyer for almost 38 years, that women still have to be a little bit better. We still have to stand out a little bit more than the men. It's an unpleasant reality, but in my view, it's a reality nevertheless. And I don't mean to be unduly negative with you, because I hope there are some of you here who aspire to be judges. But my sense is that far too many young women lawyers believe that women have no problem achieving equal treatment in the profession. And that just, ladies and gentlemen, is not the case. It's just not so. It's important for us all to remember that famous line from Robert Frost, we have miles to go before we sleep. We all have to continue to be vigilant in making sure that we work to achieve the status for all of us, men and women, equal in the profession. I hope you'll go a few of those miles with me. And thanks again for having me. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Neff, and thank you again to all the speakers, please. Thank you for everyone who came today to attend this event. The Grand Rapids Student Bar Association was very happy to have this spectacular turnout and these great speakers at this event to honor Women's History Month. Please feel free to stick around and socialize and mingle. If you'd like to have any questions for anybody, they might have an opportunity now to answer your questions. There is more food, so please help yourself to that as well. Otherwise, thank you, everybody. Again, thank you.